Welcome, tired traveler. Tonight, we leave the rushing world far behind. Step with me into the quiet, misty streets of Victorian London, where a hidden candlelit florist awaits to wrap you in the soothing scents of rain and lavender. Before we push open the heavy wooden door, if you find comfort in our stories, please leave a gentle like and subscribe. Your support helps our quiet sanctuary grow. Now, close your eyes, take a deep, slow breath, and let us begin. Part 1. Arrival in misty Bloomsbury. Let your body sink a little deeper now. Feel the weight of the day releasing from your shoulders, your jaw, the backs of your hands. There is nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to do, only this quiet story drifting in like fog through a half-open window. We begin on an autumn evening, long ago, in the gentle heart of London. The cobblestones were slick and dark with the evening's mist, each one worn smooth by a century of slow footsteps. And yours were among them now, unhurried, barely audible, softened by the wool of your traveling coat and the particular fatigue that comes not from hardship, but from a long and winding journey finally drawing toward its close. Bloomsbury settled around you like a sigh. The streets here were quieter than the ones you had come from, narrower, older, lined with tall Georgian terraces, whose windows glowed a deep amber behind heavy curtains. Somewhere, far off, the distant clatter of horse hooves rang across wet stone, a sound that came and went in waves, muffled by the thick curtain of fog that had rolled in from the river sometime in the late afternoon, and had not yet seen fit to leave. You did not mind it. The fog was company in its way. It softened every edge. It made the city feel like a watercolor left out in the rain. Still beautiful, only gentler now. Its lines blurred into something almost dreamlike. You walked without particular urgency. The address you carried was tucked safely in your coat pocket, its edges worn soft from being folded and unfolded many times. But there was no rush to find it tonight. The evening had a quality to it, a stillness beneath a mist that made hurrying feel not just unnecessary, but almost rude, as though the street itself had asked for quiet. A gas lamp stood at the corner ahead, its pale flame trembling faintly inside its glass cage, casting a circle of honeyed light onto the wet pavement below. You paused beneath it for a moment, tilting your face upward, watching the way the fog caught and diffused the glow, turning it into something softer and wider than the lamp itself. A warmth that had no hard edges, only gradients, dissolving slowly into the cool gray dark. Another lamp burned further along the street, and another beyond that, each one a small, warm island. In the mist and between them, the darkness was not threatening, but simply restful, the kind that asks nothing of you. You exhaled slowly. The air tasted of autumn, of damp leaves and chimney smoke, and something faintly mineral, the cold breathing up from the stone beneath your feet. Your breath rose in a small pale cloud and was absorbed into the fog. The whole city felt, in this moment, like it was breathing along with you. You turned down a narrower street. This one had no lamps for a stretch, only the borrowed glow from the windows above, and the cobblestones here were older, more uneven, the kind that had settled into comfortable irregularity over many generations of frost and thaw. Your footsteps made a soft, rhythmic sound against them, a sound that was easy to follow, easy to let your mind rest inside of, like a clock ticking in a quiet room. Step, step, step. The mist pressed close, The terraces rose on either side, tall and unhurried. A cat watched you from a windowsill, its eyes half closed, entirely unbothered by your passing. You were not lost exactly, but you had perhaps walked further than you had intended, and the street had curved in a way streets sometimes do in old cities, doubling gently back on itself, offering a different version of the same row of buildings, the same lamplight, the same fog. You did not feel anxious about this. There was something pleasant about not being entirely certain where you were. It gave the evening a softness, a suspension, as though you had stepped out of measured time and into something looser and more forgiving. And then you saw it. At first, it was only the light, a warm, deep amber glow spilling beneath a low doorway and out through a window of small, old-fashioned panes, the kind set in lead that caught reflections in a dozen different angles. The light was not like the gas lamps on the main street. It was warmer. It moved. It flickered in the particular living way that only candlelight does, each flame a small and independent creature, breathing and swaying in the invisible currents of a room. From where you stood, perhaps 20 paces away, the window looked like a lantern set into the wall of the building. Something lit from within by something warm and patient and very old. You slowed your steps without meaning to. The building was narrow, tucked between two taller terraces, as though it had always been there, and the others had simply grown up around it. Its facade was dark brick, ivy-threaded, with a wooden sign hanging above the door that swayed slightly in the night air. Even at this distance, in this light, you could make out the faint outline of a painted flower on it, a rose, or perhaps a peony, its petals worn soft by years of rain and sun. Beneath the sign, a small step led up to a door of dark painted wood, its brass handle gleaming in the candlelight from within. And in the window, filling the window, crowding gently against the glass, were flowers, not arranged in the careful, formal way of a display made for selling, but placed with the unhurried generosity of someone who simply had many flowers and wanted to share them. Bunches of dried lavender hung from an interior beam, their purple faded to a dusty silver. Roses, deep red, pale cream, the color of old paper, gathered in wide-mouthed clay jugs. Trailing stems of something delicate and feathery arched over the edges of mismatched pots, and behind and between all of it, candles, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, on shelves, on surfaces, on what appeared to be an old piano tucked into a far corner. Their light moved constantly, very gently, so that the whole window appeared to breathe. You stood still for a long moment, looking at it. Then you walked toward the door and you went inside. The bell above the door made a small, gentle sound, not the sharp ring of a shop bell, but something lower, softer, like a note played on a glass harp. And then the smell reached you, and for a moment, you simply stood on the threshold and let it arrive. It came in layers, the way all true and complex things do. The first was the cool, clean scent of damp earth, dark and mineral and honest. The smell of a garden after rain, of roots and clay and the deep patience of growing things. Then, rising beneath it, dried lavender, warm and dusty and sweet. A scent that carried something of summer preserved carefully into autumn. A scent that felt, somehow, like remembering. And beneath that, threaded through everything the living sweetness of roses, Not the sharp synthetic rose of other places, but the deep, rounded, slightly spiced scent of petals opened in cool air, a scent that was quiet and certain and very old. You stepped fully inside, and the door swung gently closed behind you. The room was small and completely unhurried. The shelves that lined its walls were crowded with everything a florist might need, and a great deal more. Bundles of dried herbs tied with twine, small bottles of tinted water, old books with their spines turned inward, clay pots in every size. The floor was flagstone, worn smooth, with a faded rug laid down the center that had once been red and was now something warmer and more complicated. Candles burned on every available surface, clustered together in groups of 3 and 5 and 7, their flames steady and generous in the still air of the room, casting everything in gold. And the flowers, they were everywhere, in buckets of water, along the floor, in jugs on the counter, in tin pails, hanging from the beams overhead. Roses and dahlias and late chrysanthemums, eucalyptus branches and sprigs of rosemary, bunches of dried poppy heads rattling gently to themselves. The whole room felt like the inside of a garden that had decided to come indoors for winter and found the arrangement entirely agreeable. You heard a sound from somewhere deeper in the shop, a soft, rhythmic snipping, the sound of scissors working through stems, and a moment later, a figure appeared through a curtain of hanging dried flowers at the back of the room. The florist was older, with a face that had settled into a kind of gentle steadiness, the way old wood does, not worn down, but worn into something more itself. She wore an apron over dark wool, its pockets sagging pleasantly with the small tools of her trade, and her hands, when she set down her scissors, were the hands of someone who spent a great deal of time among living things, careful and sure and faintly stained with green. Her gray hair was loosely pinned, several strands having made their way free over the course of the evening, and she did not appear troubled by this. She looked at you with the particular unhurried warmth of someone who is never very surprised to see someone arrive. "Come in out of the mist," she said. Her voice was low and even, the kind that made a room feel smaller in the best possible way, more contained, more sheltered. The evenings have been thick with it lately. October always keeps it close. You said something in reply, something simple, an apology perhaps for the lateness of the hour, or a word of wonder at the shop itself, and she shook her head very slightly, as though apologies were entirely unnecessary here. "There's no late here," she said, moving to the counter with the slow certainty of long habit. "The candles don't know the time. Neither do the flowers particularly." She glanced at you, a small warmth at the corners of her eyes. "And neither, I think, do you. Tonight, not really." She was right, you realized. Standing here in the candlelight, surrounded by the scent of roses and the soft, living warmth of 100 small flames, the hour had ceased to matter entirely. The fog pressed against the windows. The city moved on, somewhere far off, in its usual way. But here, inside this narrow room, with its crowded shelves and patient flowers, time had slowed to something very different, to the pace of a candle burning, or a flower opening, or a long, deep breath taken without hurry. You felt your shoulders drop. The florist tilted her head gently toward an old wooden stool beside the counter. Just tilted it, the smallest gesture. And somehow, this was enough. You sat down, and the evening, like a soft blanket pulled to the chin, settled around you. Let your eyes close now, if they haven't already. The candles are burning steadily. The roses are resting in their water. The mist is outside, and you are inside, and there is nowhere at all you need to go. Rest here for a while. The florist is close by, moving quietly among her flowers. You are perfectly safe. You are perfectly warm. Sleep, when it comes, will come gently. Part 2, the Candlelit Shop. Breathe in slowly. Hold it for just a moment and let it go. You are still here on the worn wooden stool inside the narrow shop, and the candlelight is still moving. That constant, unhurried movement of flame that asks nothing of you except that you watch it if you like, or close your eyes if you prefer. Both are equally welcome here. The florist is nearby. The roses are resting. The fog is outside, doing whatever fog does when no one is watching it. There is nowhere else to be. Let the room come into focus around you now. Softly, the way things come clear when your eyes have had a moment to adjust, not all at once, but in pieces, each one a small and quiet gift. The shelves were the first thing you truly noticed when she had been still long enough to see them properly. They ran from floor to ceiling on every wall, built from dark timber that had deepened over the years into the color of strong tea. Their surfaces worn smooth at the edges, where countless hands had reached and rested and reached again. They were full, not cluttered, but generously, thoughtfully full, in the way of a room that has been slowly accumulated rather than deliberately arranged. Every shelf held its own small world. On the lowest ones, closest to the flagstone floor, sat the practical things. Wide-mouthed ceramic crocks in cream and blue, their lids slightly askew. Rolls of brown paper, shallow baskets lined with burlap, holding bulbs wrapped in dry peat. Above these, the shelves grew more varied, glass terrariums of different sizes, their panes fogged softly with the breath of the small, mossy landscapes within. Tiny ferns curling toward the light of the nearest candle. A single sprig of something white and small blooming quietly in the corner of one. Beside them, porcelain vases in shapes that suggested they had each arrived from a different era in a different household. A tall, narrow one painted with blue willow branches. A squat, round one the color of old cream, with a crack along its base that had been mended so carefully it was almost invisible. A pair of small ones, identical, each holding a single dried poppy head on a long pale stem. And between all of this, wherever a shelf offered a spare inch of space, there were books. They were old, all of them, leather-bound and cloth-bound, and in some cases, bound in something that had once been leather and had since softened into something more ambiguous. Their spines were lettered in gilt that had mostly faded to a warm ghost of itself. The Language of Flowers, a practical herbal. Observations upon the Garden at Kew, Volume 3, on the classification of the rose family. One thick volume lay open, face down as though someone had set it aside mid-page and fully intended to return. You found yourself wondering what sentence they had left unfinished. You tilted your head back very slowly. The ceiling was low and dark-beamed, and from it hung the herbs. They had been gathered into bundles, some thick as a wrist, some barely a handful, and tied with loops of rough twine, then left to dry in the warmth of the shop over what must have been many seasons. Lavender, in its dozens of shades from deep violet to faded gray. Rosemary, its stiff gray-green spines pointing downward in neat formations. Chamomile, its tiny dried flowers, pale as old paper. Sage and thyme, and something you didn't immediately recognize. Silver-leafed, delicate, with a scent that drifted down when the candles below it moved. Sweet and faintly resinous, like a forest in late summer. The bundles swayed, almost imperceptibly, in the slow, warm currents rising from the candles, and their shadows swayed with them across the beams above, long and softly edged, as unhurried as everything else in this room. The effect of all of it together, the dark shelves, the glass terrariums holding their small green breaths, the books with their faded gilt, the hanging herbs shifting in the warmth, was of being inside something that had been slowly, lovingly layered, the way a bird layers a nest. Each addition chosen not for grandeur, but for fitness, for warmth, for the particular way it contributed to a whole that was more comfortable than any single part. You felt, with a certainty that required no analysis, that you were safe here. The florist had disappeared through the curtain of hanging dried flowers at the back of the shop, and from behind it came sounds you found yourself following easily, without effort. The soft knock of a kettle being lifted, the quiet percussion of a drawer being opened and closed, the small ceramic tap of cups being set onto a tray. Then, after a moment, the deeper sound of water being poured, and a smell that threaded itself through the lavender and rose and damp earth already filling the room. The warm, bergamot-edged scent of Earl Grey, and beneath it, lighter and softer, the dry sweetness of chamomile. She came back through the curtain, carrying a tray with the careful, practiced ease of someone who had carried many trays across many evenings. On it sat a brown teapot with a small chip on its lid and a worn cozy pulled over it, 2 cups of mismatched china, a small jug of milk, and a dish holding 2 pieces of shortbread wrapped in a square of cloth. She set it on the low surface near the stove, a cast iron thing tucked into the corner of the room, small and dark and gently radiating a heat that reached you from several feet away, a heat that settled against your face and hands like a kindness. Earl Grey, she said, pouring, with chamomile dried from last summer's garden. It's good for evenings that have gone on a long time. She handed you your cup without asking how you took it. And somehow, it was exactly right. Warm in your hands, not too strong, with just enough milk to soften its color to something between amber and gold. You wrapped both hands around it and held it. The stove ticked and murmured to itself. From somewhere across the room, you located it now, standing between 2 shelves in the far corner, taller than the surrounding furniture, its dark walnut case fitted with a cream-faced clock that moved its hands with a steady, measured patience. A grandfather clock marked the seconds, not loudly, just present, just keeping time in the way it had always done, and would continue to do long after tonight. And then, just at the edge of hearing, came another sound. The first soft pattering of rain against the shop window. It came quietly, as autumn rain often does, tentative at first, a few drops tapping against the old glass, then settling into a steady, rhythmic whisper that filled in behind all the other sounds of the room, like a harmony joining a melody already in progress. The candlelight caught the rivulets running down the window panes and turned them briefly gold before they reached the sill. The fog outside pressed closer. The street beyond it disappeared entirely. You had never felt less inclined to be anywhere else. "Do you know much about the language of flowers?" the florist asked after a while. She was settled into a low chair beside the stove, her cup in one hand, her gaze drifting across the room in the unfocused, comfortable way of someone entirely at ease in their surroundings. She did not look at you when she asked it, which made it easier to answer honestly, or simply to listen, which she seemed equally happy with. "Floriography," she said, turning the word over gently, as though it were a stone with a pleasant weight to it. The Victorians were very serious about it, very systematic. They had whole dictionaries of meaning, a flower for every feeling, a feeling for every flower. But I think the real truth of it is older and simpler than that. She reached out toward a small clay jug on the shelf nearest her chair, from which a sprig of dried lavender was protruding, and drew it out with 2 fingers, turning it slowly. "Lavender," she said. "Rest, calm, the easing of what has been held too tightly for too long." She set it on the arm of her chair very lightly. "People have known that for a very long time. Not because they read it in a book, because they brought it inside on difficult evenings, and the room was better for it." She was quiet for a moment. The rain continued its soft work on the windows. The clock continued its patient counting. "The rose," she said then, glancing toward the nearest jug of them, the deep red ones, their petals beginning to relax and open fully in the warmth of the room. "Everyone says love, and it is love, yes, but more precisely, the full-blown rose, the one that is opened completely. That means something more restful than romantic love. It means I am not holding anything back from this moment. I am entirely here." She looked at you then, briefly, with something warm and unsentimental. That's a good state to be in for an evening. You looked at the roses. Their petals had indeed opened wide, wide and soft and completely unguarded, the way a hand opens when it finally lets something go. The candlelight moved over them slowly, finding each fold and shadow. "Chamomile," the florist continued, her voice dropping a little lower now, "easy and unhurried as the rain, means patience, the willingness to wait for what comes next without gripping it. And the dried herbs up there?" She gestured gently upward toward the hanging bundles, shifting in the warm air above you. "Rosemary is for remembrance, for the sweetness of things that were. Sage is for wisdom quietly held. Thyme, a small pause, a smaller smile. Time simply means that you are cheerful, which is a fine thing to be." You tilted your head back and looked at them again. The lavender, and chamomile, and sage, and rosemary, swaying softly overhead, their shadows moving across the beams in long, slow arcs. An entire quiet language hanging above you in the warm dark, speaking in the only way it knew how, through scent, through stillness, through the patient offering of its dried and resting self. The stove crackled. The clock measured something. The rain softened further until it was less a sound than a sensation. The knowledge that outside was outside, and inside was this warmth and candlelight, and the scent of things that asked only to be breathed in slowly. The florist settled deeper into her chair. You settled deeper into yours. The tea was warm in your hands. Feel the warmth of the cup if you like, or set it down gently and let your hands rest open. The fire is small and steady. The rain knows exactly what it is doing. The lavender above you is doing its quiet, ancient work. You don't need to follow any of this closely. Let the words come the way rain comes, steadily, softly, without asking to be held. The florist is here. The candles are here. The roses have opened completely. You are entirely allowed to rest now. Part 3. A familiar morning visitor. The man at the door was perhaps 60 years of age, dressed in a dark coat that had seen better days, but was scrupulously brushed and maintained. He wore a black hat, slightly worn at the brim, and carried a walking stick of polished wood with a brass handle. His face was scholarly and kind, marked with the lines that come from long hours of reading by insufficient light, and his eyes held the particular brightness of one whose greatest pleasures are found in books and learning. "Good morning, Mr. Hartwell," the visitor said, his voice carrying the cultured accent of an educated man who had perhaps known more prosperous circumstances. "I hope I do not intrude upon your work." "Not at all, Professor Ashford," Mr. Hartwell replied, stepping back to allow the visitor entrance. "You are always welcome here. Please come in from the rain." Professor Ashford entered, removing his hat and shaking the moisture from it carefully. "A gentle rain," he observed. "The sort that will continue all day, I should think, neither increasing nor diminishing, but simply persisting." He set his hat upon the small table near the door and propped his walking stick against the wall. "I was passing by on my way to the reading room and thought I might inquire whether you have had any success in locating that volume we discussed." "Ah, yes," Mr. Hartwell said, moving toward his desk in the corner of the shop. "The Montaigne. I believe I may have found something suitable for you, though I must confess the price is somewhat higher than we had hoped." He opened a drawer and withdrew a small notebook in which he kept records of books he had located for various customers. "There is a copy available from a dealer in Bath. A good edition, he assures me, from 1743, Florio's translation, bound in contemporary calf. He asks £3.10 for it." "That is most generous," Professor Ashford replied. "I confess I left my lodgings without breakfast, having become engrossed in a passage of Tacitus, and quite forgetting the time. A cup of tea would be most welcome." Mr. Hartwell set about preparing the tea, while Professor Ashford wandered slowly about the shop, examining the books upon the shelves with the gentle attention of one who has loved books all his life. He paused before a volume of Horace, taking it down carefully and opening it to examine the binding. "You have repaired this beautifully," he observed. "The spine is particularly fine. Your gilding work is always so precise. It is a craft that requires patience." Mr. Hartwell said, spooning tea leaves into the pot. "My father used to say that gold will not be hurried, and he was quite right. One must heat the tools to exactly the proper temperature. Too hot, and the gold burns. Too cool, and it will not adhere. And the blind tooling must be done first to compress the leather and create the impression before the gold is laid. The results speak to your skill," the professor said, replacing the Horace carefully upon its shelf. "There is something profoundly satisfying about a well-made book. The weight of it in the hand, the way the pages turn, the smell of good leather and paper. We live in an age of increasing mechanization, but I cannot imagine a machine that could produce work of such quality." The kettle began to whistle softly, and Mr. Hartwell poured the boiling water over the tea leaves, then covered the pot to let it steep. "I confess, I am old-fashioned enough to prefer the traditional methods," he said. "I have seen some of the new mechanical binding equipment, and while it is certainly faster, I do not think the results are equal to handwork. But perhaps I am merely resistant to change, as old men are said to be. There is wisdom in preserving the old ways when they are superior to the new. Professor Ashford replied, progress is not always improvement, despite what the enthusiasts for modernity would have us believe. I myself prefer the Greek in the original to any modern translation, however clever, and I suspect I am not alone in that preference. Mr. Hartwell poured tea into 2 cups, added milk to each, and handed one to the professor, who accepted it with a small nod of thanks. They stood together in companionable silence for a moment, sipping their tea while the rain continued its gentle percussion against the window and the fire crackled softly in the grate. I have been thinking lately about memory, Professor Ashford said, after a time, his voice thoughtful and quiet. How we preserve it, how we lose it. Books are a form of memory, are they not? The thoughts of the dead, preserved in ink and paper, bound together so that they might speak to those not yet born when the words were written. I have often thought something similar, Mr. Hartwell said. When I repair an old book, I sometimes imagine the hands that have turned those pages before mine, the readers across the years, each bringing their own thoughts and circumstances to the same words. A book is a bridge across time, and yet the bridges themselves require maintenance, the professor observed, gesturing at the volumes awaiting repair on the shelves. Without craftsmen such as yourself, these bridges would crumble, and the voices of the past would be silenced. It is important work you do, Mr. Hartwell, more important perhaps than you realize. Mr. Hartwell smiled slightly. I merely do what I was trained to do, he said, but I confess there is satisfaction in it, to take something broken and make it whole again, to ensure that a book will survive to be read by another generation. One feels a certain responsibility toward these volumes, as if they have been entrusted to one's care. They spoke on in this manner for some time, their conversation unhurried and gentle, moving from topic to topic without plan or purpose. The merits of various translations of Homer, the proper treatment of leather that has become dry and brittle, the remarkable collection of classical texts in the British Museum's Reading Room, the difficulty of finding good glue in an age when many suppliers had turned to inferior ingredients. Professor Ashford finished his tea and set the cup down with care. I must not keep you from your work any longer, he said. I am expected at the reading room, and there are sources I must consult for an article I am attempting to write on Cicero's rhetoric. But I thank you for the tea and the conversation. Both have been most restorative. You are welcome at any time, Mr. Hartwell said, and I shall continue to inquire about the Montaigne. Perhaps a more reasonably priced copy will present itself. You are very good, the professor said, retrieving his hat and walking stick. I shall call again in a few days, if I may, to learn whether there has been any news. He settled his hat upon his head and opened the door, and the sound of the rain grew momentarily louder. Good day to you, Mr. Hartwell. May your work proceed smoothly. And may yours also, Professor, Mr. Hartwell replied. Good day. The professor stepped out into the rain, and Mr. Hartwell watched him walk away, his figure gradually fading into the gray morning until he was no longer visible. Then he closed the door and returned to his workbench, feeling warmed not only by the tea and the fire, but by the gentle comfort of friendship and shared interests. Part 9. Closing the shop. The days continued their inevitable progression toward winter. November arrived with its characteristic gray skies and early darkness, and Mr. Hartwell found himself lighting the lamps earlier each afternoon, feeding the fire more frequently, wearing an additional waistcoat beneath his work apron to ward off the chill that crept in through the old window frames. his work continued at its steady pace. Books came in for repair and went out restored. Customers called, not many, but enough to keep him occupied and to provide the modest income he required for his simple needs. Professor Ashford visited twice weekly, always courteous, always interested in discussing whatever book he was currently reading. The little girl Eleanor appeared once more, bringing her saved pennies to purchase another small book, this time a collection of fairy tales with woodcut illustrations that Mr. Hartwell sold her for tuppence. All she had, though it was worth considerably more. He thought often about Thomas Weatherby and Eleanor Marsh, about their story that had remained unfinished for so many years and which had found a kind of resolution, however melancholy, through the chance preservation of a journal. He kept Weatherby's books on their shelf near his workbench, and sometimes, during quiet moments, he would take down the commonplace book and read an entry or two, finding in those private thoughts a kind of companionship. One evening in late November, as the clock struck 6 and full darkness had settled over the city, Mr. Hartwell began the familiar ritual of closing his shop for the day. It was a process he had performed thousands of times, yet it never became entirely automatic. There was something almost ceremonial about it, this marking of the boundary between work and rest, between the public space of the shop and the private space of his rooms above. He began by checking the fire. It had burned low, the coals reduced to glowing embers. He used the poker to spread them evenly across the grate, then covered them with ash from the bucket, enough to bank the fire safely, but not so much as to extinguish it entirely. In the morning, he would be able to revive it easily, adding fresh coal to the embers that would have survived the night. Next, he tidied his workbench, though it was already quite orderly. He wiped down the surface with a cloth, removing any dust or small particles of leather or paper. He arranged his tools precisely, the bone folders in their holder, the brushes clean and dry, the knives wrapped in their protective cloth, the pots of glue and paste secured with their lids. Everything had its place, and everything must be returned to that place. This was not mere fussiness. It was respect for the tools that had served him well, that had served his father before him. He moved about the shop, straightening books on their shelves, though they scarcely needed straightening. His hands touched familiar spines, his fingers recognizing volumes by their texture, the rough buckram, the smooth calf, the peculiar grain of Morocco. Each book was an old friend, and this evening round was a way of greeting them, acknowledging their presence. The volume he had been repairing, the 16th century work with the torn page, sat in its press on the corner of the workbench. The repair had been successful. The Japanese tissue had merged almost invisibly with the old paper, and when the book was opened, the mend could barely be seen. Tomorrow, he would work on rebinding it, but for tonight, it was enough that the pages were whole. He checked the window shutters, ensuring they were properly secured. Through the glass, before he closed the shutters, he could see the street outside. Dark now, the gas lamps making small pools of light on the pavement. A few people hurried by, collars turned up against the cold. A cat crossed the street with studied nonchalance, pausing to look directly at Mr. Hartwell as if acknowledging his observation, then continuing on its way. He closed the shutters, fitting them carefully into place, and secured them with the iron bar. The shop felt smaller now, more enclosed, but also safer, more intimate. He extinguished the lamps one by one. First the one over the workbench, then the one near the door, then the one by the window. Each time a lamp was darkened, the room grew dimmer until only the faint glow of the banked fire remained, painting the walls with soft, shifting shadows. In this near darkness, Mr. Hartwell stood for a moment in the center of his shop, simply listening to the silence. It was not absolute silence. He could hear the faint sounds of the building settling, the distant rumble of a cart on another street, the whisper of wind against the shutters. But it was the silence of day's end, of work concluded, of the world preparing for rest. He thought, as he often did during this quiet moment, about his father, who had stood in this same spot countless times, performing this same ritual. The shop held the accumulated presence of all those years, all those days of work and care. It was a good feeling to be part of that continuity, to be carrying forward something that had been built slowly over generations. He checked the door one last time, ensuring it was locked. The key turned firmly in the old mechanism. Then he took a candle from the small table beside the door, for the stairs were dark, and lit it from the last remaining lamp before extinguishing that light as well. With the candle casting its small circle of light before him, Mr. Hartwell climbed the stairs to his rooms above the shop. Each step creaked its familiar note, like an old song he had heard so many times. He could anticipate every phrase. At the top of the stairs, he paused and looked back down at the shop, now almost invisible in the darkness, defined only by the faint red glow of the banked fire visible through the doorway. "Good night," he said softly, though there was no one to hear him, except perhaps the books sleeping on their shelves, the tools resting on the bench, the fire dreaming in its grate. Then he turned and entered his rooms, closing the door gently behind him, leaving the shop to its peaceful darkness, its quiet wait for morning. Part 10. The gentle silence of books. In the deep hours of night, when the city had settled into its quietest time, the bookbinding shop of Mr. Elias Hartwell rested in a stillness so complete it seemed to exist outside the ordinary passage of time. The fire in the grate had burned down to the merest whisper of warmth, the coals barely glowing, shrouded in their blanket of ash. No light came through the shuttered windows. No sound penetrated from the street outside. The darkness was absolute and soft, like velvet, like peace itself made tangible. If one could have been present in that darkness, invisible, unseeing, one might have sensed, rather than observed, the particular quality of the silence that filled the shop. It was not the silence of emptiness, but rather the silence of fullness, of presence without movement. The books upon their shelves stood in their orderly rows, spines facing outward, each containing within itself worlds of thought and story, knowledge and imagination. They did not speak, for they required no voice. They simply were patient and permanent, waiting for hands that would open them, eyes that would receive what they offered. The workbench held its burden of tools with the same patient stillness. The bone folders, worn smooth by 3 generations of handling, rested in their place. The needles, sharp and fine, lay in their case. The knives, honed and careful, slept in their wrappings. Each tool knew its purpose and waited without complaint for morning, when it would again be called upon to serve. In the half-darkness, barely visible even if there had been eyes to see, the volume that Mr. Hartwell had been repairing sat in its press, its pages gently held, the mended tear invisible now, the paper dreaming perhaps of its long journey through centuries, of the hands that had made it, of the words printed upon it, of all the readers who had turned its pages and would turn them still in years to come. On the shelf near the workbench, Thomas Weatherby's books stood together, the green-cloth commonplace book, the Marcus Aurelius, the Wordsworth, the French grammar. These volumes had survived their creator by decades and would likely survive for decades more, bearing within them the traces of a life lived quietly, a mind that had thought and felt and struggled and endured. They asked nothing, expected nothing, simply held their memories in silence. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked on, its mechanism patient and regular, measuring time in increments so small they seemed meaningless individually, but which, accumulated, made days and weeks and years and lives. The sound was so soft as to be almost inaudible, yet it was there, a tiny heartbeat in the darkness, proof that time continued its forward movement even in the deepest stillness. Far above, in his rooms, Mr. Elias Hartwell slept the sleep of the exhausted and content, the sleep of one who has worked honestly and can rest without burden. His breathing was slow and regular, barely disturbing the quiet of his small bedchamber. In sleep, his face held the same gentle patience it wore in waking hours, the patience of one who has learned to accept life as it comes, neither demanding more nor regretting less. Perhaps he dreamed of books, of leather and paper, of glue and gold leaf. Perhaps he dreamed of his father standing at the workbench, demonstrating some technique with careful movements. Perhaps he dreamed of nothing at all, simply resting in that deep place beyond thought and image, that dark pool of unconsciousness where the mind releases its grip on the day and allows itself to float, weightless, in the gentle current of sleep. Outside, London too was sleeping, or mostly sleeping. Here and there, a light still burned, a watchman making his rounds, a clerk working late, a mother tending a sick child. But most of the great city had settled into its hours of rest, millions of souls lying in millions of beds, dreaming their various dreams or sinking into dreamless oblivion, their conscious minds released for a time from the burden of being. In the shop, the darkness seemed to deepen further, to become even more absolute, if such a thing were possible. The objects in the room, the books, the tools, the furniture, the walls themselves seemed to settle more completely into stillness, as if releasing some final tension that had held them through the day. It was the hour when day is most distant and morning still inconceivable, when time itself seems to pause, to draw breath before continuing. Between the books, tucked into the shelves like small, quiet treasures, a large conch shell, its interior a faded rose, a glass float, pale green, the kind that used to travel on fishing nets, a small brass compass in a leather case, a piece of driftwood worn by the sea into something almost sculptural, 3 or 4 smooth stones and colors that could only have come from this particular shore. You feel, looking at all of this, that you are reading a life. Sit, sit, Edric says, gesturing toward one of the 2 armchairs by the fire. They are old chairs, wide and deep, and upholstered in a fabric that has faded from what might once have been burgundy to something softer, the color of a rose, pressed in a book and kept for years. The cushions have molded themselves over time to the shapes of the people who have sat in them. And when you lower yourself into one, it receives you with a kind of considered ease, as if it has been waiting for exactly someone your size and weight and wariness. You sink in, you let out a breath. The fire speaks quietly to itself in the hearth. From the kitchen, a small room off the sitting room, partially visible through an open door, come the sounds of Edric moving about, the soft percussion of a cabinet opening, the gentle clink of ceramic, the low song of the kettle beginning its work again. The sounds are unhurried. They are the sounds of a person who does not rush anything, who has learned, or perhaps always known, that things happen at the speed they need to, and no faster. He settles into the other chair with a slowness that is not infirmity, but ease. the ease of a person who has sat in this chair 1,000 times and knows exactly how to do it. He wraps his hands around his own mug and looks into the fire for a moment in silence. And the silence is entirely comfortable, the kind that needs no filling. Outside, the lighthouse beam sweeps. You can see its passage faintly through the small window beside the fire. A brightening and a fading and a brightening again, slow and steady as a heartbeat. How long have you been here? You ask, when the silence has rested long enough that speaking feels natural. Edric considers. He has the unhurried quality of someone who gives every question its due weight. I came here when I was 32, he says at last. I had been a sailor before that, merchant vessels mostly. I knew the sea from the deck, but I wanted to know it from the shore. He pauses. It's different, you know. From the deck, the sea is something you move through. From here, he glances toward the window, toward the sound of the waves. It's something that moves through you. You hold your mug with both hands and let the warmth travel up through your palms. You take a small sip. It is still very hot and sweet and gentle, and something in it immediately begins to do a quiet work somewhere behind your sternum. A loosening. The lighthouse, you say. How old is it? Edric smiles at the fire. She was built in 1847, he says, and there is something tender in the way he says it, the way some people speak of very old things they love. The original light was oil. Whale oil at first, then later paraffin. There was a keeper here every night in those days, 2 of them usually, sharing the watches. The light had to be tended through the hours, the oil replenished, the lens cleaned, the mechanism wound. He looks up at the ceiling, in the direction of the tower you know rises just beyond these walls. She's changed with the times, electric now, and mostly automatic. But I still keep the old logs, still maintain the schedules. Some things shouldn't be left entirely to machines, I think. There is a long, easy pause. The fire settles with a soft sound, a log shifting, a constellation of sparks rising briefly and going out. From somewhere outside, you cannot tell exactly where, a gull makes one slow, sleepy cry and then is quiet. The waves continue their work below the cliff. The early keepers, Edric says, with the quiet pleasure of someone turning to a favorite subject, were extraordinary people. Imagine it, months at a stretch in a place like this, just you and the sea and the light, the loneliness of it. But the records they left, the logs, they don't read like loneliness mostly. They read like people who had found something, a kind of clarity maybe, a sense that what they were doing mattered, that the ships moving in the dark out there were safer for their presence. He looks at you. There's a great deal of peace to be found in that, I think, in a purpose that is simple and clear and genuinely good. You find that you agree, though you are not sure you could have said so in those words before tonight. The fire burns lower and softer. You drink your tea in slow, warm sips. The ginger has settled into a pleasant warmth somewhere in your chest. Outside, the beam sweeps and sweeps. You notice that you have stopped counting your worries, that they have not so much disappeared as receded, like the tide pulling back to reveal the clean, smooth sand beneath. Edric tells you about the winter storms, not with fear in his voice, but with a kind of respectful wonder, the way you speak of things that are larger than you and always will be. He tells you about the seabirds that nest in the cliff below every spring, the way they return to the exact same ledge year after year, finding their way home across thousands of miles of open ocean. He tells you about the ships he has watched pass, their lights moving slowly across the dark water, and how he has thought about the people on them, going somewhere, and felt a quiet goodwill toward every one. The cottage holds all of this. The books hold it. The charts hold it. The fire holds it and gives it back as warmth. At some point, you could not say exactly when, you realize that your eyes have grown heavy, not unpleasantly, in the way that eyes grow heavy when the body at last believes it is safe, when the nervous system puts down what it has been carrying and says, here is enough. Here we can rest. Edric notices the way he seems to notice everything, quietly, without making much of it. The guest room is just at the base of the tower, he says, setting down his mug. I've made it up. There's a window that looks east, over the water. He pauses. You'll hear the light turning. Some people find it takes getting used to. Most find they sleep better for it. He leads you through a narrow doorway and into a short passage that curves slightly. You are entering the base of the lighthouse itself now, you realize. The walls here are stone and thicker, and they have a coolness that is not unpleasant. There is a low wooden door, which he opens, and beyond it, a small room that is nearly round, as the lighthouse is round, with a ceiling that follows the curve of the stone walls. The bed is narrow and high and covered with quilts in the blues and whites of seafaring things. There is a small window, round as a porthole, as he said, looking east. Through it, the night sky, and just at the edge of vision, the faint, pale line where sky meets sea. Sleep well, Edric says, and his voice is low and warm and certain, the way voices are when they mean what they say. He pulls the door closed behind him. His footsteps move back down the passage. Unhurried, you sit on the edge of the bed. The quilts are cool and soft under your hands. The lighthouse beam sweeps outside, and through the porthole window, its light moves briefly across the ceiling. Once, and then the room is dark again, and then again, slow and even and rhythmic as breathing. You lie back. The pillow is soft, the quilts are heavier than you expected, and exactly the right weight. The sound of the waves comes through the stone walls, muffled and deepened by the thickness of them, so that it is less a sound than a feeling, a vibration at the very base of things, a rhythm the world keeps with or without your attention. You close your eyes. The light sweeps once more across the ceiling. The sea breathes below. You're held here in the old stone, between the land and the water, in the keeping of the light. Part 10, Farewell at Dawn. You wake before the light for the first time. The porthole window is still dark. Not the deep dark of midnight, but the particular dark that comes just before dawn, when the night has said everything it has to say and is waiting now, quietly, for what comes next. The lighthouse beam is still turning. You can see it in the way the darkness shifts above you, that slow brightening and releasing, the pulse of it, faithful as breathing. You lie still and listen. The sea, always the sea, patient and unceasing, speaking its low and rhythmic language to the cliff below. The mechanism in the tower above, its hum traveling down through the stone. Somewhere outside, a single bird. You do not know which kind, only that its note is clear and rising and entirely untroubled. A small bright sound in the vast quiet of the pre-dawn. It calls once, and then again, and then the silence reassembles itself around it, deeper for having been broken. You do not want to get up, not because you are unwilling to leave. You know that you must, that the life waiting for you is your life, and it is asking for you back, gently but clearly. But because this room, this curved stone room, with its porthole window and its quilts and the hum of the turning lens above, has become, in a very short time, something that feels like an old belonging, a place you did not know you needed until you had it. You want to stay in it a little longer, to breathe it a few more times. So you do. You lie in the warm dark and breathe and listen and let yourself be here fully for these last unhurried minutes. The quilts hold you. The stone holds the quilts. The headland holds the stone. The sea holds the headland, as it has always held it, shaped it, made it what it is. You hold all of it, too, in your own small way, in memory, which is the only way any of us can hold a place once we have left it. The window begins to change. It happens so gradually that you cannot point to the moment it begins. Only notice, at some point, that the dark has softened, that where there was nothing there is now a very faint suggestion of color, a lightening at the edge of the sky that is less a color than an intimation of one. Pewter becoming gray, becoming very slowly the first pale intimation of blue. You watch it and feel the way dawn always makes you feel when you are awake to receive it properly, as if something is being given, as if the world is beginning again, as it always does, and as it always will, long after any of us are here to watch. You rise. Edric is already in the kitchen, of course. He is standing at the stove, as he was that very first morning, with his back to you and his tea in his hand, looking out the window at the sea which is, this morning, extraordinary. The dawn light catching it at the lowest possible angle, turning the water to hammered copper and rose gold. The swells moving through it slowly, each one a slightly different shade of the same warm color. You stand in the doorway for a moment and look at his back, at his white hair, at the set of his shoulders, at the particular quality of stillness he carries everywhere with him like a second coat, and you feel something that is mostly gratitude and partly grief, the small, clean grief of leaving something good. He hears you, as he always hears you, without turning. "Good morning," he says, and then, "Look at it today." "I'm looking," you say. He turns then and sees your face, and his own face does something quiet and knowing, and he nods once, slowly, and pours you a cup of tea. You sit at the kitchen table together for the last time. The breakfast is simple: bread and butter and a soft-boiled egg, but kind of breakfast that is perfect in its plainness, that needs nothing added to it. You eat slowly. The copper light on the water shifts gradually toward gold as the sun lifts itself clear of the horizon, and the sea changes again, becoming bluer, more itself. The dawn colors, releasing it back to its daytime character. The lighthouse beam, which has been turning through the night, fades now into the growing light, not turning off, just becoming invisible, as it does each morning, its work for the night completed. The bird outside calls again. More of them now, a small chorus assembling itself in the cliff grass, tuning up for the day. "You have everything?" Edric asks eventually. You think of the amber sea glass in your jacket pocket, the green piece from the second day on the beach, the smooth gray stone, perfect and dark, the compass, wrapped in a cloth and placed carefully in the inner pocket of your bag, where you will feel it against your chest as you walk. "Everything," you say. He walks you to the gate. The yard is bright with morning now, the low sun striking the lighthouse tower and turning the old gray stone almost golden, and above it, still, always turning. The lantern room catches the light and throws it back in long prismatic flashes that travel across the yard and over the gate and out along the coastal path ahead of you. The grass on either side of the path is beaded with dew, each drop holding its own tiny sun. And the air is cool and clean and carries with it the smell of the sea and the low-growing herbs between the pathstones and something else. Something that might simply be the smell of a morning that is fully itself. At the gate, you stop and turn. Edric stands a few feet back, his hands in the pockets of the storm cloud sweater, his white hair lifting slightly in the morning breeze. He looks at you with the expression you have come to know and will not forget. Warm and knowing and gentle and entirely without need of anything from you beyond what you have already given, which is simply your presence, your attention, your willingness to be here. Safe travels, he says. His voice is the same as it always is, low and unhurried, roughened by salt air, carrying in it all the weather of his long and faithful years on this headland. "Thank you," you say. And as before, the words carry more than they can contain. But he receives all of it. You can see that the way he receives everything, quietly, completely, without making more of it than it is, or less. You reach into your inner pocket and feel the compass there, its brass warm now, already part of you. "I'll take care of it," you say. He smiles, the slow smile beginning in the eyes. "I know you will." You turn and go through the gate. The coastal path stretches ahead of you, winding north along the clifftop, and you walk it slowly, as you have learned to walk in this place, with your eyes open and your pace matched to what is around you, rather than to any destination. The sea is to your right, enormous and blue and quietly alive, the swells moving through it with their patient, steady breathing. The cliff grass is green and damp, and the small hardy flowers among it are opening to the morning. The sea pinks and the tiny yellow things you have never learned the name of, and the occasional flash of something white and delicate that bends in the slightest wind. You walk, and the lighthouse falls behind you. You do not turn for a while, not because you don't want to. You do, deeply, but because you want to wait until the wanting is fully formed, until the moment is ready to be seen properly. You walk, and the path turns slightly, and you hear the foghorn from somewhere down the coast, one long, low note drifting up through the morning air, tender as it has always been, the sound that says, "I am here, I am here. You are not alone." Then you turn. The lighthouse stands on the headland behind you, smaller now with distance, but entirely clear in the morning light. The old gray tower rising from the cliff, the lantern room at its top catching the sun, and the beam still turning, invisible in the daylight, but turning as it always turns, as it turned through the night just past and will turn through the night to come. At the base of the tower, the cottage, its windows catching the light, the low stone wall, the gate. Edric is still there, a small figure now, at this distance, but unmistakable. The white hair, the storm cloud sweater, the hands in the pockets, the stillness. He is watching you go, and something in the fact of that he has stayed to watch, that he is still there, fills your chest with a warmth that you think will take a long time to cool. You raise one hand. After a moment, he raises his. You turn back to the path and walk on. The lighthouse grows smaller behind you as the path curves away from the headland, and the land begins to change. The open clifftop giving way to a gentler slope, the salt grass yielding to longer growth, a hedgerow appearing on the left, the first signs of the ordinary world reassembling itself around you. But you do not feel the weight of it yet. The ordinary world can wait a little longer. You are still here, still walking this path between the sea and the sky, still carrying in you everything that these days have left behind. The compass rests against your chest. The sea glass is in your pocket, smooth and cool and amber. The words are with you too, all of them. Edric's quiet words gathered over days by the fire and on the cliff and in the lantern room and on the night beach under the stars. Let it be slow. Begin again each day. The light moves through the darkness steadily, without frightening itself. If you know where north is, you can find any direction from it. These are not instructions. They are not rules. They are simply what is true, offered without urgency, available now whenever you need them, which is to say, they are yours. The path bends once more, and the sea comes back into full view. The whole wide blue of it stretching to the horizon, the morning light lying across it in long golden bands. You stop for a moment and simply look at it the way Edric has taught you to look at things, with your full and unhurried attention, without deciding in advance what you will find. What you find is this: the sea is very large and very old and entirely indifferent to your smallness, and in that indifference there is a great and restful freedom. You are not required to be large. You are not required to be anything other than what you are, a person on a path, carrying a compass, walking slowly toward whatever comes next, changed in some quiet and permanent way by a few days at the edge of the world. You breathe in, you breathe out. The foghorn sounds once more, faint now with distance, and then fades. The sea goes on, and now as the path leads you gently forward, as the morning holds you in its golden, unhurried light, as the sound of the waves grows soft as breathing, and softer still, let your shoulders drop. Let your hands rest. Let the compass rest against your chest and feel it there, warm and steady, its needle pointing north through everything, through all the days and all the distances and all the darkness, always finding the fixed point, always holding true. You are walking toward rest now. The path is smooth, the light is warm, the sea breathes far below, patient and eternal, in and out, the oldest rhythm, the one your own body knows. Let it carry you all the way down into the soft and quiet dark, into sleep, into peace. The end. Thank you for listening. May you always know which way is north, and may the light always be turning for you, somewhere out on the water, guiding you gently home. Hello, midnight companions. Tonight, I'd like to invite you into the quietest corner of the night. Together, we'll wander through a distant Victorian train station, softly lit and gently humming with the last breaths of resting locomotives. In the company of a kind night porter, this peaceful story will help your mind unwind, your body soften, and your thoughts drift toward sleep. Take a slow, easy breath, let your eyes grow heavy, and welcome the night with me. The clock somewhere in the distance has just finished its long, low counting. 12 strokes, each one softer than the last, dissolving into the cold night air like breath on a winter window. The last echo fades, and what remains is silence. Not the hard silence of empty spaces, but the deep, padded silence of a world that has simply decided to rest. You are here now. You have arrived. The station opens before you. Slowly, the way a dream opens, not all at once, but in layers, each one settling gently over the last. There is the smell first, coal smoke and iron, cold stone and something sweetly floral. Perhaps from a window box somewhere above the arching entrance, a last brave cluster of late-season roses, refusing to acknowledge the lateness of the hour. The smell is old and kind. It asks nothing of you. It simply surrounds you, the way a favorite coat surrounds you when you lift it from its hook on a winter evening. Your footsteps slow as you pass beneath the great entrance arch. The arch is iron and stone, impossibly tall, dressed along its crown in scrollwork that the lamplight cannot quite fully illuminate. There are suggestions of leaves up there, and perhaps birds, half-seen shapes that may be flowers or faces or clouds, all softened by decades of soot and weather into something beautifully indistinct. You don't need to see it clearly. It is enough to know it is there above you, solid and patient, holding the roof of the world up just so, the way it has for more years than either of you can count. Beneath it, you step onto the platform. The platform stretches away on both sides, its stone flags worn smooth and pale, polished by the passing of 10,000 journeys, into something almost luminous. The gas lamps stand in a long row, each one casting its own small, warm kingdom of amber light. And between each lamp, soft shadows pool and breathe. The shadows do not feel dark here. They feel restful, the way shadows in a beloved room feel restful, familiar, gentle, simply the absence of something that was never needed. To your left and to your right, the locomotives sleep. There are two of them on the near tracks, great iron creatures settled into stillness, their boilers cooling now, ticking very softly in the deep quiet, the way a cast iron stove ticks after the last log has been laid. From one, a long exhalation of pale steam drifts upward and sideways, moving slowly across the lamplight, through the cold air, unfurling as it rises until it becomes nothing, or rather, until it becomes part of the air itself, indistinguishable, released. You watch it go. There is no hurry. There is nowhere to be except exactly here. The steam drifts and thins and vanishes. The station holds its breath. Your own breathing, you notice, has grown slower. It seems to have taken its rhythm from the station, from the long, unhurried intervals between sounds, the faint tick of cooling iron, the distant murmur of something, a sleeping pigeon perhaps, shifting in the ironwork far above, the soft groan of a timber somewhere in the old station master's office, the building settling into the night the way old buildings do, flexing and relaxing, breathing in their own patient way. You set your bag down, not because you must, but because it seems right. The bag belongs on the pale stone floor of this platform. At this hour, in this pool of amber lamplight, it has arrived where it was always going. So, perhaps, have you. Rest now. The toys keep their watch. The darkness holds all things gently, and the night moves on, carrying its cargo of silence and stillness toward the distant shore of morning. Rest. All is well. All is safe. All things wait, patient and peaceful, for the return of light. Sleep. Tonight, I invite you to a narrow, cobbled street in the old city of York, where the fog drifts softly between the buildings and a single candle glows in the window of a small shop. It is the workshop of a candle maker, a place filled with the scent of warm wax, gentle light, and the quiet weight of passing years. But on one of the shelves, there is a candle that always burns a little longer than the rest, and each evening, the old candle maker notices it yet never blows it out. Before the story begins, stay here with me for just a moment. Watch the soft flicker of the flame and let this quiet workshop carry you slowly toward sleep. Part 1. The Candlemaker's Window. The fog came early to York that morning, as it so often did in the weeks before Christmas, settling upon the ancient streets like a soft woolen blanket drawn up by invisible hands. It crept along the worn cobblestones of Stonegate, curling around the corners of timber-framed buildings that had stood sentinel for 300 years or more, their upper stories leaning companionably toward one another across the narrow thoroughfare, as though sharing whispered confidences in the gray dawn. In the stillness before the city properly woke, before the clatter of cartwheels and the calls of merchants broke the silence, there was only the muffled sound of footsteps here and there, a baker making his way to his ovens, a lamplighter completing his rounds, extinguishing the gas lamps one by one, as the pale winter light began its slow ascent behind the cathedral towers. And there, halfway down the street, in a building no wider than 2 windows and a door, a single point of golden light pierced the fog. It glowed steadily in the window of a small shop, warm and constant, as though it had been burning all through the night. The light caught the frost that had formed on the outside of the glass, transforming each crystalline pattern into something precious and delicate. It illuminated the painted lettering above the door, letters that had faded somewhat over the years, but could still be read by those who knew to look. Halbrook and Son, Chandlers, established 1823. The "and Son" had not been true for many years now. Inside the shop, the air was thick with the sweet honeyed scent of beeswax, mingled with the faint smokiness of tallow and the clean sharpness of new cotton wick. The walls were lined with shelves from floor to ceiling, and upon those shelves stood candles of every conceivable size and shape. Tall tapers for dining tables stood like soldiers in their wooden boxes. Squat, sturdy candles for lanterns nestled in rows. Delicate votives, no bigger than a thimble, weighted in paper wrappings. And larger pillar candles, substantial and serious, occupied the middle shelves with an air of quiet dignity. The single candle that had been burning through the night stood upon the counter near the window, its flame steady and unwavering, despite the drafts that found their way through the old building's many cracks and crevices. It was not an especially large candle, nor was it particularly ornate. It was made of good beeswax, pale gold in color, with a simplicity of form that spoke more eloquently than any decoration might have done. As the church bells of York Minster began to toll 6 o'clock, their deep voices rolling across the rooftops and chimney pots, a door at the back of the shop opened, and an elderly man emerged into the golden half-light of the workshop. Mr. Edwin Halbrook moved slowly, as befitted a man in his 73rd year, but there was nothing feeble in his movements. He carried himself with the careful precision of one who had spent a lifetime working with hot wax and open flame, where haste could mean burnt fingers or ruined work. His hair, what remained of it, formed a silver halo around his head in the candlelight. He wore a wool waistcoat over his shirt and an apron, much mended and bearing the stains of countless candles, was already tied about his waist, for he had put it on before even making his tea, as was his habit. As each new candle caught and bloomed into light, the shop transformed. Shadows retreated into the corners. The grain of the wooden shelves became visible, rich and warm. The brass scales on the counter gleamed softly. And in the window, the candles arranged for display began to glow like a constellation of small earthbound stars. Mr. Halbrook stepped back to survey his work, as he always did, ensuring that the shop looked as it should. His eyes traveled across the familiar landscape of shelves and stock, of tools and materials, of the accumulated evidence of a life spent in quiet making. And then, as his gaze reached the highest shelf on the wall behind the counter, he paused. There, slightly apart from the others, stood a single candle. It was not the largest candle in the shop, nor the most beautiful, though it possessed a beauty of its own, a simple, unadorned pillar of pale beeswax that seemed to hold the light with interest. Mr. Halbrook could not have said with certainty how long that particular candle had been there. Years, certainly, perhaps a decade or more. What he could say, what he had noticed season after season, year after year, was that it burned longer than any candle had a right to burn. He had lit it, of course, many times. When the shop grew particularly cold, or when he worked late into the evening and needed the company of light, and it burned as any candle would burn, with a steady golden flame. But it never seemed to diminish, or if it did diminish, it did so with such exceeding slowness that the change escaped notice. The candle stood at the same height, maintained the same dignity of form year after year, as though time itself had agreed to pass it by. Mr. Halbrook did not dwell on this mystery overmuch. He was not a fanciful man. The world, in his experience, contained enough genuine wonder in the way light moved through wax, in the precise moment when liquid became solid, in the mathematics of wick and flame, that he felt no need to invent more. If the candle burned longer than seemed natural, well, perhaps he had made it especially well. Perhaps the wax had been particularly pure, the wick particularly true, or perhaps, and here a small smile touched his lips, perhaps some mysteries were content to remain mysterious, and that was perfectly acceptable. He turned away from the high shelf and moved to the small window at the back of his shop, drawing aside the curtain to look out into the yard beyond. The fog was beginning to thin, just slightly, and he could make out the shapes of the neighboring buildings, the dark line of the wall that separated one property from another, the bare branches of the tree that grew in Mrs. Pemberton's garden next door. It would be a quiet day, he suspected. The fog would keep many people at home, but there would be visitors nonetheless. There always were. Someone would need candles for their church. Someone else would want a good light for reading. Perhaps young Thomas from the bookshop would come by for the tapers he preferred for his late-night studying. Mr. Halbrook returned to the front of his shop and settled himself on the tall stool behind the counter. He had an hour, perhaps, before anyone would knock at the door. Time enough for a cup of tea. Time enough to watch the morning light strengthen. Time enough to simply sit in the company of candlelight and silence, two things of which he had never grown tired. The candle on the counter continued to burn, its flame painting slow, wandering shadows on the ceiling above. Outside, York was waking. Somewhere, a door opened and closed. Voices called out greetings. The city was remembering itself, shaking off the night's dreams, preparing for the day's work. But here, in the small shop on Stonegate, time moved differently. Here, the day began as it always had, with light chasing back darkness, with small rituals performed with care, with the quiet knowledge that some things, warmth, welcome, the steady burning of a good candle, remained constant in a world much given to change. Mr. Halbrook drew a breath, feeling the warmth of the shop settle around him like an embrace. Outside, the fog would lift. Customers would come, work would be done. But for now, in this moment, there was only the gentle glow of candlelight, the sweet smell of beeswax, and the peaceful certainty of another day beginning as it should. The candle on the high shelf, the one that burned longer than it ought, remained where it had always been, keeping its quiet vigil, holding its small mystery close. And in the window, the golden light continued to shine, a beacon for anyone who might be walking through the fog, a promise of warmth and welcome in the gray December morning. Part 2. Wax, Wick, and Quiet Hands. The morning tea had been drunk, the cup rinsed and set aside, and now Mr. Halbrook turned his attention to the work that would occupy the greater part of his day in the room behind the shop, a space that served as both workshop and storeroom. The tools of his trade awaited him with the patient silence of inanimate things that know they will be needed. He moved through the narrow doorway, ducking his head slightly, though the passage was tall enough, a habit formed over long years when his back had been straighter and the world a fraction larger. The workshop was smaller than the shop itself, but it possessed a completeness that the front room lacked. Here was where the true work happened, where formless wax became light, where the alchemy of his craft transformed simple materials into something useful and good. The table that dominated the center of the room bore the marks of decades of labor. Its surface was scarred and stained, darkened in places where hot wax had spilled and cooled, lighter in others where his hands had worn the wood smooth through endless repetition. Along one wall stood shelves holding blocks of beeswax, their surfaces dull gold in the dim light. Beside them, wrapped in cloth, were stores of tallow, less expensive, less fragrant, but necessary nonetheless for those customers whose purses could not stretch to beeswax. Mr. Halbrook ran his hand along the edge of the table, a gesture of greeting, of acknowledgement. Then he set about preparing his workspace with the methodical care that had become second nature. First, the fire. The small stove in the corner needed tending, its embers from the night before stirred to life and fed with carefully chosen pieces of coal. Not too much. The heat must be steady and even, not fierce. Wax was a delicate thing, for all its seeming solidity. Too much heat, and it would scorch, turning bitter and dark. Too little, and it would never properly melt, remaining thick and unworkable. He worked the bellows gently, coaxing the fire to a steady glow. The warmth began to spread through the small room, chasing away the morning chill that had settled in the corners. Mr. Halbrook could feel it on his face, on his hands, a warmth that spoke of work about to begin, of purpose about to be fulfilled. While the stove heated, he selected the wax he would work with today. His hands moved over the blocks with assurance, choosing 3, all beeswax, for he had an order to fill for the cathedral, and they would accept nothing less. The wax was cool and firm beneath his fingers, its surface slightly rough. He could smell it even before heating, that characteristic scent of honey and summer meadows, of flowers and industry, and the patient work of bees. He broke the blocks into smaller pieces, using a broad-bladed knife, the wax fracturing along natural lines with satisfying cracks. The pieces went into a large copper pot, one that his father had used, and his father's father before that. The pot was burnished to a soft glow, its bottom darkened by years of heat, its handle wrapped in leather that had molded itself to the shape of hands, now long since. Still, Mr. Halbrook set the pot on the stove and watched as the wax began its transformation. It happened slowly, as all good things do. At first, nothing seemed to change. The pieces of wax sat in the pot, apparently impervious to the heat below. But if one watched closely, and Mr. Halbrook always watched closely, one could see the moment when the wax began to surrender. A faint sheen appeared on the surface of the pieces. The edges softened, grew rounded, and then, almost imperceptibly at first, the solid began to flow. It melted from the bottom up, turning liquid gold pooling in the base of the pot and slowly climbing the sides of the pieces that remained solid. Mr. Halbrook stirred gently with a wooden paddle, helping the process along, watching as piece after piece yielded to the heat and became part of the whole. The smell intensified as the wax melted, sweet and warm and infinitely comforting, filling the workshop and seeping through into the shop beyond. It was the smell of his childhood, of watching his father work, of learning that patience and attention were worth more than haste and force. It was the smell of countless quiet mornings, just like this, one of work done well, of craft practiced with care. When the wax was fully melted, Mr. Halbrook removed the pot from direct heat and set it on a trivet to cool slightly. Wax that was too hot would not hold a wick properly, would burn the cotton and make for a poor candle. It needed to cool to just the right temperature, hot enough to coat and penetrate, cool enough to begin setting almost immediately. While he waited, he prepared the wicks. They hung in bundles from hooks on the wall, long strands of braided cotton, clean and white and ready. Mr. Halbrook took down a bundle and cut it into lengths appropriate for the tapers he would make today. Each cut was measured not with a rule, but with his eye, an eye that had made this judgment so many thousands of times that it no longer required conscious thought. His hands simply knew. He arranged the cut wicks on the table, laying them out parallel to one another, straight and neat. Disorder in the beginning led to disorder in the end. And Mr. Halbrook had no patience for disorder, not from irritation. He was not an irritable man, but from the simple understanding that his craft deserved better. Outside, the fog had lifted somewhat, and through the high window of the workshop, a pale gray light filtered down. It mingled with a warmer light from the candles he had lit earlier, creating a soft illumination that was neither holy daylight nor holy candlelight, but something in between, a gentle diffused glow that seemed to suit the quiet work of the morning. Mr. Halbrook tested the wax with one finger, pressing lightly against the surface. It was ready. That particular warmth, that particular consistency, these were things he knew in his bones, knowledge accumulated through years of daily practice until it became instinct. He took up the first wick and dipped it into the wax. The process was simple. Lower the wick into the pot, immersing it completely. Lift it out. Wait. The wax that coated the wick would cool and harden, creating a thin layer, then dip again and again and again, layer upon layer, each one adding infinitesimal thickness, each one building toward the final form. Dip, lift, wait. Dip, lift, wait. The rhythm of it was hypnotic, meditative. There was no rushing this work. Each layer needed time to cool before the next could be added, or else the accumulated wax would simply slide off, wasted. So, Mr. Halbrook dipped in rotation, working his way through the dozen wicks he had prepared, giving each its turn, returning to the first, just as it was ready for another layer. His hands moved with the unconscious grace of long practice. The wicks dipped and rose, each time emerging a fraction thicker than before, the wax building up in smooth, even layers. Slowly, so slowly that the change was almost imperceptible from moment to moment. Thin string became slender candle. The work left his mind free to wander, though it never wandered far. Memories drifted up like smoke. His father standing at this very table, his hands performing these same motions. His own younger self, learning the craft, impatient at first with the slowness of it, the repetition, gradually coming to understand that the slowness was the point, that the repetition was where the quality lived. He remembered the first candle he had made entirely by himself. How proud he had been. how his father had examined it with serious eyes before nodding once. A single nod that had meant more than 1,000 words of praise. He remembered winters, when the demand for candles was so great that he and his father had worked long into the night. The workshop warm despite the cold outside. The two of them moving in companionable silence, the work creating a bond that needed no words to strengthen it. The rain began while he worked, so softly at first that he didn't immediately notice. It was only when the sound registered, a gentle pattering against the window, a whisper against the roof, that he looked up and saw the water streaking the glass. A winter rain, cold but not freezing, the kind that would turn the streets to mud and keep sensible people by their fires. The sound of it was pleasant, a quiet accompaniment to the work of his hands. Inside the workshop, all was warmth and light and the sweet smell of beeswax. Outside, the gray afternoon grew grayer, but it seemed distant, separate, a different world entirely. Dip, lift, wait, dip, lift, wait. The candles were taking shape now, growing from thin tapers to something more substantial. Mr. Halbrook's experienced eye judged their progress. A few more rounds, perhaps, and they would be ready. Not too thick. These were meant to be elegant, refined, suitable for the cathedral's altar. Too thick, and they would look clumsy, inappropriate. He continued his work, his breathing slow and even, his movements steady and sure. There was no part of him that was elsewhere, no portion of his attention that wished to be doing something other than what he was doing. This was enough. This had always been enough. The workshop settled into a stillness, broken only by the sound of the rain, the occasional crackle of the fire in the stove, and the gentle dripping of wax back into the pot as each taper was lifted. Time seemed to soften, to stretch, to become less a series of distinct moments and more a continuous stream, flowing quietly onward. Mr. Halbrook's hands moved through the wax and through the air, dipping and lifting, creating beauty through simple repetition. His shadow on the wall behind him moved in rhythm, a dark companion performing the same patient dance. And slowly, gradually, the candles approached completion, each one a small testament to the value of careful work, of attention paid, of craft honored. The rain continued to fall. The afternoon deepened, and in the warm, wax-scented workshop, an old man's hands continued their ancient work, as they had done yesterday, and the day before, and would do tomorrow and the day after that. Dip, lift, wait, dip, lift, wait. The rhythm of making, the rhythm of living, the rhythm of a life well spent in the quiet creation of light. Part 3. The Bell Above the Door. The bell above the shop door was a small brass thing, tarnished with age, but still possessed of a clear, sweet voice. Mr. Halbrook had hung it there himself when he was still a young man, newly inheriting the shop from his father, wanting to put his own small mark upon the place. Over the years, that bell had announced thousands of visitors, and its sound had become so woven into the fabric of his days that he sometimes heard it in his dreams. It rang now, just as he was hanging the finished tapers to complete their drying, its gentle chime cutting through the quiet of the late morning with a sound that was more greeting than interruption. Mr. Halbrook wiped his hands on his apron, though they were quite clean. This too was habit, and made his way from the workshop to the shop. Through the doorway he could see a figure silhouetted against the watery light from the window, a shape he recognized even before features became clear. "Good morning, Mrs. Ashworth," he said, his voice warm with genuine pleasure. A wet day to be out and about. Ashworth was pushing back the hood of her cloak, revealing a face that bore its 70 years with grace. the lines around her eyes and mouth speaking of a life well lived and much smiled through. She was a small woman, neat in her movements, and she had been coming to Mr. Halbrook's shop every Tuesday morning for longer than either of them cared to precisely remember. "Good morning, Mr. Halbrook," she replied, her voice carrying the particular warmth reserved for old friends. Wet indeed, but one cannot let a little rain dictate one's schedule. The week would fall to pieces entirely if one did. She was the schoolteacher at St. Mary's, had been for 40 years, and she brought to all aspects of her life the same gentle discipline she brought to her classroom. Mr. Halbrook had always admired that about her, the way she moved through the world with purpose but without hurry, accomplishing much through steady application rather than dramatic effort. "I suspect your pupils were not quite so philosophical about the rain this morning," Mr. Halbrook said, moving to help her with her cloak. Mrs. Ashworth laughed softly. The younger ones arrived looking like a collection of drowned mice, all complaining most dramatically. But they settled soon enough once we began the day's lessons. Children are wonderfully resilient creatures, though they do enjoy a bit of theatrical suffering when the opportunity presents itself. She shook out her cloak and hung it on the peg by the door, where it began to drip quietly onto the stone floor. Mr. Halbrook made a mental note to put down a cloth later, though he suspected he would forget, as he always did, and simply wipe up the small puddle before closing for the evening. "I've come for my usual order," Mrs. Ashworth said, turning to survey the shelves with the air of one who has time to spare and intends to enjoy spending it, though I confess I'm in no great hurry. The children have their geography examination this afternoon, and Mr. Palmer is proctoring. I have a blessed hour of freedom before I need to return. "Then you must have tea," Mr. Halbrook said decisively. "The kettle is already hot, and I was just thinking how pleasant a cup would be." It was a small fiction. This, he had not been thinking of tea at all, but it was the sort of fiction that smoothed the social path, that allowed one to offer hospitality without making the other feel they were imposing. Mrs. Ashworth understood this perfectly well, and she smiled in acknowledgement of the gentle dance they were performing. "Tea would be most welcome," she said. "Thank you." Mr. Halbrook retreated to the small back room where he kept his personal things: a tin for tea, a small spirit kettle, 2 cups that had belonged to his mother, their porcelain so fine that light showed through when they were held up to a candle. He prepared the tea with the same careful attention he brought to his candle making, warming the pot, measuring the leaves, waiting for the water to reach the precise moment between boiling and cooling when tea was best made. When he returned to the shop, Mrs. Ashworth had settled herself on the chair he kept near the counter for those customers who wished to sit while they made their selections or discussed their orders. She had removed her gloves and was holding her hands out to the warmth radiating from the candles that burned throughout the shop. "It's always so wonderfully warm in here," she said, as he handed her a cup of tea. "Even on the coldest days, one steps through your door and feels immediately comforted." "Candlelight carries warmth in more ways than one," Mr. Halbrook said, settling himself on his stool. "Though I confess the shop does stay warmer than one might expect. The workshop especially, all that melted wax, all those small flames. It's quite pleasant in winter." They sipped their tea in comfortable silence for a moment, the kind of silence that can exist only between people who have known each other long enough that conversation is a choice rather than an obligation. Through the window, the rain continued its gentle percussion against the glass. The street outside was largely empty, only the occasional hurried figure passing by, head down against the weather. The world seemed to have drawn in upon itself, seeking shelter and warmth, content to wait out the rain in whatever safe harbor it could find. "I've been thinking about candlelight," Mrs. Ashworth said eventually, her voice reflective. "Teaching the children about the invention of the gas lamp last week, and of course, they find it all terribly exciting, this modern world of ours, but I found myself rather sad, thinking about what we're losing." Mr. Hellbrook nodded slowly. He had thought similar thoughts many times, though he tried not to dwell on them overmuch. Progress was coming, as it always did, and one could not stop it any more than one could stop the rain or the turning of the seasons. Candlelight has a quality to it, Mrs. Ashworth continued, a gentleness that these bright gas flames lack. When I was a child, we read by candlelight every evening. My father would light the candles one by one, and it was like a signal. The day's work was done. The night's peace had begun. There was something sacred about it, I think. Something that marked the transition from labor to rest. There is an honesty to candlelight, Mr. Hellbrook said quietly. It doesn't pretend to be stronger than it is. It illuminates what is near and leaves the far corners in shadow. It reminds us that we cannot see everything, know everything, control everything, and there is a comfort in that, I find. Ashworth looked at him with the expression of someone who has heard a truth they already knew but had not known how to articulate. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes, exactly that." They sat together in the warm glow of the shop, two old friends sharing tea and thoughts, while outside the world rushed past in the rain. Here, time seemed to pool like candle wax, accumulating slowly, creating something solid and real from what had been liquid and formless. He leads you through a narrow doorway and into a short passage that curves slightly. You are entering the base of the lighthouse itself now, you realize. The walls here are stone and thicker, and they have a coolness that is not unpleasant. There is a low wooden door, which he opens, and beyond it, a small room that is nearly round, as the lighthouse is round, with a ceiling that follows the curve of the stone walls. The bed is narrow and high, and covered with quilts in the blues and whites of seafaring things. There is a small window, round as a porthole, as he said, looking east. Through it, the night sky, and just at the edge of vision, the faint, pale line where sky meets sea. "Sleep well," Edric says, and his voice is low and warm and certain, the way voices are when they mean what they say. He pulls the door closed behind him. His footsteps move back down the passage, unhurried. You sit on the edge of the bed. The quilts are cool and soft under your hands. The lighthouse beam sweeps outside, and through the porthole window, its light moves briefly across the ceiling. Once, and then the room is dark again, and then again, slow and even and rhythmic as breathing. You lie back. The pillow is soft, the quilts are heavier than you expected, and exactly the right weight. The sound of the waves comes through the stone walls, muffled and deepened by the thickness of them, so that it is less a sound than a feeling, a vibration at the very base of things, a rhythm the world keeps with or without your attention. You close your eyes. The light sweeps once more across the ceiling. The sea breathes below. You're held here in the old stone, between the land and the water, in the keeping of the light. Part 10, Farewell at Dawn. You wake before the light for the first time. The porthole window is still dark. Not the deep dark of midnight, but the particular dark that comes just before dawn. When the night has said everything it has to say, and is waiting now, quietly, for what comes next. The lighthouse beam is still turning. You can see it in the way the darkness shifts above you, that slow brightening and releasing, the pulse of it, faithful as breathing. You lie still and listen. The sea, always the sea, patient and unceasing, speaking its low and rhythmic language to the cliff below, the mechanism in the tower above, its hum traveling down through the stone. Somewhere outside, a single bird. You do not know which kind, only that its note is clear and rising and entirely untroubled. A small bright sound in the vast quiet of the pre-dawn. It calls once, and then again, and then the silence reassembles itself around it, deeper for having been broken. You do not want to get up, not because you are unwilling to leave. You know that you must, that the life waiting for you is your life, and it is asking for you back, gently but clearly. But because this room, this curved stone room with its porthole window and its quilts and the hum of the turning lens above has become, in a very short time, something that feels like an old belonging, a place you did not know you needed until you had it. You want to stay in it a little longer, to breathe it a few more times. So you do. You lie in the warm dark and breathe and listen and let yourself be here fully for these last unhurried minutes. The quilts hold you. The stone holds the quilts. The headland holds the stone. The sea holds the headland, as it has always held it, shaped it, made it what it is. You hold all of it, too, in your own small way, in memory, which is the only way any of us can hold a place once we have left it. The window begins to change. It happens so gradually that you cannot point to the moment it begins. Only notice at some point that the dark has softened, that where there was nothing there is now a very faint suggestion of color, a lightening at the edge of the sky that is less a color than an intimation of one. Pewter becoming gray, becoming very slowly the first pale intimation of blue. You watch it and feel the way dawn always makes you feel when you are awake to receive it properly, as if something is being given, as if the world is beginning again, as it always does, and as it always will, long after any of us are here to watch. You rise. Edric is already in the kitchen, of course. He is standing at the stove, as he was that very first morning, with his back to you and his tea in his hand, looking out the window at the sea which is, this morning, extraordinary. The dawn light catching it at the lowest possible angle, turning the water to hammered copper and rose gold. The swells moving through it slowly, each one a slightly different shade of the same warm color. You stand in the doorway for a moment and look at his back, at his white hair, at the set of his shoulders, at the particular quality of stillness he carries everywhere with him like a second coat, and you feel something that is mostly gratitude and partly grief, the small, clean grief of leaving something good. He hears you, as he always hears you, without turning. "Good morning," he says, and then, "Look at it today." "I'm looking," you say. He turns then and sees your face, and his own face does something quiet and knowing, and he nods once, slowly, and pours you a cup of tea. You sit at the kitchen table together for the last time. The breakfast is simple: bread and butter and a soft-boiled egg, but kind of breakfast that is perfect in its plainness, that needs nothing added to it. You eat slowly. The copper light on the water shifts gradually toward gold as the sun lifts itself clear of the horizon, and the sea changes again, becoming bluer, more itself. The dawn colors, releasing it back to its daytime character. The lighthouse beam, which has been turning through the night, fades now into the growing light, not turning off, just becoming invisible, as it does each morning, its work for the night completed. The bird outside calls again, more of them now, a small chorus assembling itself in the cliff grass, tuning up for the day. "You have everything?" Edric asks, eventually. You think of the amber sea glass in your jacket pocket, the green piece from the second day on the beach, the smooth gray stone, perfect and dark, the compass, wrapped in a cloth and placed carefully in the inner pocket of your bag, where you will feel it against your chest as you walk. "Everything," you say. He walks you to the gate. The yard is bright with morning now, the low sun striking the lighthouse tower and turning the old gray stone almost golden. And above it, still, always turning, the lantern room catches the light and throws it back in long prismatic flashes that travel across the yard and over the gate and out along the coastal path ahead of you. The grass on either side of the path is beaded with dew, each drop holding its own tiny sun, and the air is cool and clean and carries with it the smell of the sea and the low-growing herbs between the path stones and something else, something that might simply be the smell of a morning that is fully itself. At the gate, you stop and turn. Edric stands a few feet back, his hands in the pockets of the storm cloud sweater, his white hair lifting slightly in the morning breeze. He looks at you with the expression you have come to know and will not forget. Warm and knowing and gentle and entirely without need of anything from you beyond what you have already given, which is simply your presence, your attention, your willingness to be here. "Safe travels," he says. His voice is the same as it always is, low and unhurried, roughened by salt air, carrying in it all the weather of his long and faithful years on this headland. "Thank you," you say, and as before, the words carry more than they can contain. But he receives all of it. You can see that the way he receives everything, quietly, completely, without making more of it than it is, or less. You reach into your inner pocket and feel the compass there, its brass warm now, already part of you. "I'll take care of it," you say. He smiles, the slow smile beginning in the eyes. "I know you will." You turn and go through the gate. The coastal path stretches ahead of you, winding north along the clifftop, and you walk it slowly, as you have learned to walk in this place, with your eyes open and your pace matched to what is around you, rather than to any destination. The sea is to your right, enormous and blue and quietly alive, the swells moving through it with their patient, steady breathing. The cliff grass is green and damp, and the small hardy flowers among it are opening to the morning. The sea pinks and the tiny yellow things you have never learned the name of, and the occasional flash of something white and delicate that bends in the slightest wind. You walk, and the lighthouse falls behind you. You do not turn for a while, not because you don't want to. You do, deeply, but because you want to wait until the wanting is fully formed, until the moment is ready to be seen properly. You walk, and the path turns slightly, and you hear the foghorn from somewhere down the coast, one long, low note drifting up through the morning air, tender as it has always been, the sound that says, "I am here, I am here. You are not alone." Then you turn. The lighthouse stands on the headland behind you, smaller now with distance, but entirely clear in the morning light. The old gray tower rising from the cliff, the lantern room at its top catching the sun, and the beam still turning, invisible in the daylight, but turning as it always turns, as it turned through the night just past and will turn through the night to come. At the base of the tower, the cottage, its windows catching the light, the low stone wall, the gate, Edric is still there.